for a few minutes at the very beginning. And I'll explain why after, but for a few minutes, we'll practice meditation. We'll practice loving kindness meditation. But when you practice this meditation, I want you to be very, very aware of how your mind is acting. Be aware of, let's say your mind drifts into other thoughts, then try to be aware of what kind of thoughts are arising in your mind. Everyone understand? So your goal right now is, when we practice this meditation, to be aware of the thoughts that are arising in your mind. So everyone close your eyes and sit in a comfortable position. Now calm your mind and think for these next few minutes, there's nothing I have to worry about. There's nothing I have to think about. Let any problem you have in your mind go. Now focus completely on how your mind is reacting. Now think in this way. May I be free from anger. May I be free from ill will. May I be free from jealousy. May I be free from mental suffering. May I be free from physical suffering. May I live in peace. May I live happily. May all beings in this house be free from anger. Be free from ill will. Be free from jealousy. Be free from mental suffering. Be free from physical suffering. May they live in peace. May they live happily. May all beings in this city be free from anger. Be free from ill will. Be free from jealousy. Be free from mental suffering. Be free from physical suffering. May they live in peace. May they live happily. May all beings in this province be free from anger. Be free from ill will. Be free from jealousy. Be free from mental suffering. Be free from physical suffering. May they live in peace. May they live happily. May all beings in this country be free from anger. Be free from ill will. Be free from jealousy. Be free from mental suffering. Be free from physical suffering. May they live in peace. May they live happily. May all beings in this country be free from anger, be free from ill will, be free from jealousy, be free from mental suffering, be free from physical suffering. May they live in peace. May they live happily. May all beings be free from anger, be free from ill will, be free from jealousy, be free from mental suffering, be free from physical suffering. May they live in peace. May they live happily. May all beings live happily. Live happily. Live happily. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Now, we practice meditation there first. Was anyone able to focus their mind completely on the meditation? That means they didn't have any stray thoughts? Just nod yes if you were able to. So we all had thoughts that came into our mind. Now, those are all bothers to us. Because with meditation, what we want to do is focus on a single mental object. And the Supreme Buddha teaches that there are 5 main hindrances to us developing our mind. Now, these hindrances weaken our wisdom. They're a bother to us. Now, does anyone remember what the nature of wisdom is? So, in our last session, we talked about that we have to identify first that a defilement has arisen in our minds. Let's say anger has arisen. Someone's yelled at us, and now there's anger in our minds. Now, with wise consideration, we've realized that there's anger in our mind. Us seeing that there's anger is called wise consideration. Now there's anger. Now we have 2 options. We can either start planning on what to say back, how to get revenge. We can harbor ill will. We can do whatever it is in one path. And then in the other path, we can think, no, anger is bad. I should remove this defilement and cut it off. That cutting off happens with wisdom. So wisdom has the nature of cutting. Wise consideration has the nature of grasping. It grasps. So with wise consideration, you grasp the defilement, and with wisdom, you cut it off. And the simile is, imagine, have you guys ever seen people cut wheat with their hands? They grasp the wheat, and then with the sickle, they cut it off. They cut the bottom. So with wise consideration, you understand there's a defilement. It could be lust, it could be anger, whatever it is, you understand that there's a defilement in your mind. And sometimes we just let the defilement stay there. If it's lust, we just keep thinking about the lust over and over again. If it's anger, we keep thinking about the anger over and over again. So understanding there's the defilement in our mind is wise consideration. And then the act of cutting off is with wisdom. To do that, you also need energy, because you actually have to cut the defilement off. You have to cut the anger off. So in order for our wisdom to develop, we need to abandon these hindrances. We need to push them aside. We need to suppress them so that we can stay focused on our mental object. We can stay focused on our meditation. That's why when you guys, right now, when we practice meditation, you trade thoughts, right? All of those thoughts, whatever thought you had, will fit into one of these 5 hindrances. Whatever those thoughts you had, it'll fit into one of them. Now, the Supreme Buddha teaches that these hindrances, they weaken wisdom. They're a bother to the mind. And when these hindrances are in our mind, it's hard for us to know what's good for us. It's hard for us to know what's good for others. It's hard for us to know what's good for us and others. And it's impossible that someone could realize or develop the Dhamma when these hindrances are in their minds. So don't forget our goal. What's our goal? Our goal in the Dhamma is to achieve liberation. We want to escape from aging, sickness, and death. And with that goal in mind, now we have to obtain some kind of concentrated mind. That's why we meditate. But to achieve that, there's something called these 5 hindrances. Now, in these next 4 weeks, we're going to learn what the hindrances are, how we can, what's the reason that they arise, and how we can work towards getting rid of them. So today, we're just going to learn that there are these hindrances and what's their nature. How do they function in our mind? And then we're going to practically try and see the kind of thoughts that arise in our mind. Now, the Supreme Buddha teaches, imagine, he gives a simile for this. Imagine that there's a tall mountain, the high mountain, and it starts to rain. And from that mountain comes a river. Now, this river is coming from a tall mountain. So is it coming slow or fast? It's coming fast. It's carrying whatever it meets in its path, it carries it along with it. If there's a tree in the path, it carries the tree along. If there's rocks, it carries the rocks along because it's coming from a high place. Now, as it comes down the mountain, someone sees the river, and what they do is they cut channels along the sides. They cut paths along the side of the river. So what happens to the water? Does it travel far or does it get spread out? It spreads out. Does it travel fast or does it slow down? It slows down. Why? Because the water is being dispersed. The water is being carried off in different directions now. In the same way, the ability of our mind to act on a single object is hindered when those 5 hindrances are there. They're a bother to us. The power of our mind gets dispersed. It can't focus on that one thing. And then the Supreme Buddha gives, imagine the same river, but in this case, someone closes whatever paths there are on the side of the river. That person goes and closes all of them. That way the water doesn't get dispersed. That way the river is the only area where the water is traveling. If someone does that, does the water travel far or does it end up short? It travels far because the water isn't being dispersed. Does the water travel fast or does it travel slow? It travels fast because the water, again, isn't being dispersed. In the same way, when someone suppresses or abandons these 5 hindrances, then it's possible, then his mind is able to see the good, what's good for himself, what's good for others, and what's good for both himself and others. And he's able to develop his mind. So we have to understand that these hindrances are a bother to us. They're a bother for us to develop our minds. One day, a Brahmin comes and tells the Supreme Buddha, now just be aware of what he asks. There's a Brahmin named 𝗙𝗵𝗂𝗃. He comes and talks to the Supreme Buddha and says, sometimes there are times where I practice my teaching. I practice the verses in my doctrine very, very well. That means he constantly repeats whatever his verses are in his teaching. And I practice those over and over again, but I seem to forget them. I can constantly keep forgetting. And the ones that I don't practice very well, then obviously I forget those as well. What's the reason? Even though I'm practicing, even though I'm trying to memorize the verses, I keep forgetting them. What's the reason for that? And then he says, but there are also other times where I just repeat them once or twice and I remember them very easily. Even the ones I don't practice that much, they also are in my mind. I can remember them very, very easily. What's the reason between these two? Now, even though he asked the question in terms of his religion, in terms of, because he's a Brahmin, in terms of what he's used to, we have the same problem. There are some times when we can easily remember the Dhamma, we can easily recall something, and we can contemplate on that. And then there are times when it's hard for us to even remember or recollect the Dhamma. It completely is gone from our minds. And even if we try to remember it, nothing comes. So this Brahmin is just asking that question. What's the reason that there are two different times like this? One time we can remember really, really well. Another time, it seems like we forgot everything. And then the Supreme Buddha teaches, Brahmin, when someone has a mind obsessed by sensual lust, if his mind is obsessed by sensual lust, then even though he repeats, even though he practices, even though he tries to memorize those verses, even though he tries to memorize those things, he can't do it because his mind is obsessed by one of the hindrances. So the first hindrance is sensual lust. Now, we're gonna go into detail on what that is, but for now, just understand the first hindrance is called sensual lust. And the Supreme Buddha gives a simile for that. And the simile is this. Imagine there's a bowl of water. There's a clear bowl of water. And then someone comes and he takes some dye, red dye, blue dye, green dye, whatever color it is, and then he puts it in the bowl. And then he comes and stands over the bowl of water. Can you see his reflection? No. Why is that? Because the water has been dyed a different color. In the same way, when someone has sensual lust obsessing his mind, then he can't recollect what he learned. He can't remember what he memorized. He can't recollect the Dhamma. It doesn't come to mind. So one of the first hindrances is sensual lust. That's the first one. What's the first one? Sensual lust. Now don't worry about what is that, what does that mean? We're going to go through that. Then the Supreme Buddha teaches, there's another reason why someone might not remember what they practiced. The second reason is that his mind is obsessed by ill will. And since his mind is obsessed by ill will, since he doesn't see the escape from ill will, he can't abandon it. Because he can't abandon it, he can't remember what he learned. He can't remember what he practiced. So the second hindrance is ill will. The first is sensual lust. The second is ill will. And to this, the Supreme Buddha also gives a simile. Imagine there's another bowl of water, but this bowl of water is over a fire. It's being heated, and what happens when the water is being heated? It starts bubbling. It starts boiling. When it bubbles and boils, if someone goes and stands over it, can they see their own reflection? No. So in the same way, when someone's mind is obsessed by ill will, then they can't understand for themselves. They can't remember the Dhamma. They can't practice the Dhamma. They can't recollect the Dhamma because his mind is obsessed by ill will. So look at the difference here. The first one, his sensual pleasure. The simile is like it's being dyed. It's just being dyed. The second one, ill will, has the nature of bubbling. So when you get angry, it's not the same as having lust in your mind. It's completely different. Your body gets hot. Your actions are more aggressive. Those all reflect with the thoughts. Our actions, our bodily behavior, all reflects what's in our mind as well. So look at the Supreme Buddha simile there. So we've learned 2 hindrances so far. Then the Supreme Buddha teaches there's another reason. There's a third reason why someone might not remember, why someone might forget the Dhamma that he's practicing. And he gives a third reason as his mind might be obsessed by dullness and drowsiness. That means he's sleepy and bored. If someone's mind is obsessed by dullness and drowsiness, then he also can't recollect what he memorized. He also can't remember what he practiced. So that's a third hindrance. The first is sensual pleasure. The second is ill will. The third is dullness and drowsiness. And for this, the Supreme Buddha gives the simile. Imagine there's a water bowl, but this is covered with algae and other kinds of water plants. The whole surface is covered by algae and other kinds of plants. Because of this, when someone goes and stands over the water bowl, can they see their own reflection? No, because it's covered at the top. In the same way, when someone has dullness and drowsiness obsessing their mind, they can't recollect what they learned. They can't recollect what they practiced and memorized. So that's the third one. Then the Supreme Buddha teaches there's the fourth reason why someone might forget what he learned, what he practiced, is that his mind is obsessed by restlessness and remorse. The fourth one is restlessness and remorse. And when he has restlessness and remorse obsessing his mind, when he doesn't see the escape from that, then he can't remember what he practiced. He can't remember what he memorized. And this, the Supreme Buddha teaches as, imagine this bowl of water, and this is stirred by the wind. There's waves. It's constantly being churned, and there's waves forming because there's a powerful wind going over the water. So it's churning and it's rippling and it's swirling. So when someone stands over that bowl of water, since it's being disturbed, he also can't see his own reflection. In the same way, when someone has restlessness and remorse obsessing their mind, they can't remember what they learned. They can't remember what they practiced. So that's 4. You guys should memorize these. So the first one, put them into your brain, not just on paper. First one is sensual lust. The second one is ill will. The third one is, what's the third one?
Dullness.
Huh?
Dullness or drowsiness.
Yes, drowsiness and dullness. Dullness and drowsiness. And then the fourth one? Restlessness and remorse. And then finally, the Supreme Buddha teaches that if doubt is obsessing one's mind, then he can't remember what he practiced. He can't remember what he memorized. And for this, the Supreme Buddha teaches, imagine there's a bowl of water, and this is completely cloudy. It's muddy, and it's placed in a dark area. There's no light coming onto it. And when someone goes and stands over that bowl of water, what happens? Can they see their reflection? No, because it's muddy, it's in a dark area, and is cloudy, so he can't see his own reflection. In the same way, when doubt obsesses one's mind, they can't, and they don't see the escape from doubt, they can't remember what they learn, they can't remember what they memorize. So those are the 5 hindrances. Now, at any point, most of our day, if we take your mind even right now, well, not right now, but let's say during your day normally, your mind will be fluctuating from one of these to another. It will go from sensual lust to ill will, from ill will to dullness and drowsiness, from dullness and drowsiness to restless and remorse. The hindrances are constantly with us. That's why it's hard to abandon them, because normally when we continue our day, when we practice just going about our day, we're constantly with these 5. We're constantly giving food to these 5. So when you sit down to meditate, you're practicing the complete opposite. You're trying to focus on one thing, and all those thoughts that you had, all those things that you thought about during the day, they start flushing in, they start flooding in. So when we sit down and meditate, what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate ourselves from these 5 hindrances and suppress them. Now, the first thing, what's the first hindrance? Sensual pleasure. Now let's give some definitions to these. Now look back when we meditated and see what kind of thoughts you had in your mind. What kind of thoughts came? The first is sensual pleasure. Sensual pleasure means there are some things we see with our eyes. There are forms we see with our eyes that are pleasant, that are appealing to us. If a appealing form comes to our mind, that falls under sensual pleasure. Then there are sounds that we hear with our ears. There are certain sounds that we hear that are pleasant, that are appealing to us. If any of those sounds come into our mind, then those fall under sensual pleasure. That could be a song you listen to on the radio. That could be, so the first one could be a person you saw. It could be a painting you saw. It could be a picture of food. Whatever it is, all of them fall under sensual pleasure. And then there are some smells you smelled with your nose that are appealing and pleasant. Those all fall under sensual pleasure. That could be someone might be cooking in your house and you smell something that smells good. It could be a perfume that someone wore and you remember. So those kinds of thoughts all fall under sensual pleasure. Then there are tastes that you tasted with your tongue that are appealing and pleasant. That could be, those all fall under sensual pleasure. And that could be like a food you tasted today. That could be something that you had in the past, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is. That feeling, that taste you had, when you remember that, when thoughts about that come into your mind, those fall under sensual pleasure. And then there is comfort or tangibles that you felt with your body. Those all that are those tangibles and comforts that you felt with your body that are appealing and pleasant, they all fall under sensual pleasure. So that could be like, let's say a bed. You remember your bed. You think, oh wow, my bed is so comfortable. It feels nice. It could be a couch. It could be a chair. It could be whatever it is. Some tangible or some comfort you felt that is appealing to you, that is pleasant to you. Those kinds of thoughts can come to your mind, and those all fall under sensual pleasure. Then think, just normally in our day, most of our day is spent thinking about sensual pleasure. Most of our thoughts are based on those. What am I going to eat next? What am I going to do this afternoon? Am I going to watch a movie? Am I going to listen to a song? Because when you have that thought, what is on your mind? a pleasant sound, a pleasant form that you want to see, a pleasant taste that you want to taste, a pleasant scent that you want to smell. You're constantly searching for those things. Because our mind is constantly searching for those things, because our mind is constantly trying to get those things into our life, our mind is constantly thinking about sensual pleasure. Because of that, when we sit down and meditate, what kind of thoughts come into our mind? Thoughts about sensual pleasure. So those desires come into our mind. So all of those pleasant forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles all fall under sensual pleasure. That's under the first hindrance. Make sense? That's a bother to us. Then the Supreme Buddha teaches, for ill will is the complete opposite. They are forms that we see with our eyes that are unpleasant, unappealing. When those kinds of forms come into our mind gets conflicted. When it gets conflicted, ill will arises. There's a conflict in our mind now. And that conflict is a bother to us. That conflict falls under ill will. So a conflict with a form that we saw. Then there are certain sounds that we hear with our ears that are unappealing and unpleasant. When those come into our mind, again, what happens? Our mind gets conflicted. This could be 5 years ago, someone yelled at you. 5 years ago, someone left let's say for a form, someone left a bad comment on your picture. And you remember that. Now that thought starts coming in. And then what happens? There's a form that you saw that you didn't like. You saw that comment and you didn't like it. And our mind gets conflicted. Now our mind is thinking about that comment. Or it could be someone yelled at you, or said something mean about you, or said something behind your back, or said something about how you look. When you think about that, what happens? Your mind gets conflicted. You heard that sound, and that sound was unpleasant and unappealing. So what happens? Our mind gets conflicted. And now it's just thinking about that sound you heard. Then the same thing for the rest. There are some smells that we smell that are unpleasant, unappealing. Those thoughts come into our mind and they cause a conflict. They cause ill will. Then there are tastes that we tasted that are unpleasant, that are unappealing. And those also cause a conflict. So it could be like someone didn't give you a portion of the best food, or someone didn't give you a slice. Whatever it is, what happens? You didn't get that taste, so now you get conflicted. Ill will arises. I'm just giving a small example. But all of those thoughts will fall under one of those. And then there are tangibles. There are comforts that are unpleasant, unappealing. And those kinds of thoughts also come into our mind. And when they come into our mind, we get conflicted. Ill will arises. This easiest example is someone hits us. You remember someone hitting you. You remember someone hitting you, and what happens? You remember an unpleasant feeling that arose from contact with our body. That tangible was unpleasant. That hand hitting your body was unpleasant. And when you remember that, you remember this person hit me. This person did that to me. This person. And then you think about bad things about that person. And that also falls under ill will. When you sit down to meditate, all of these kinds of thoughts start rolling in. So that's two things. The first is sensual pleasure. That means any form, sound, smell, taste, and tangible that's pleasant. And under ill will is any form, sound, smell, taste, and tangible that's unpleasant, unappealing, that causes a conflict in our mind, which causes ill will. Then the Supreme Buddha teaches that there is a third there's a third hindrance, and that's dullness and drowsiness. Now, I'm not going to name names, but when we practiced our meditation for just a few minutes, some people started to nod. Their mind became lethargic. Their mind became tired. And how did that take form? They started to nod, meaning they started to lean forward. Their head would go forward. Because what happens as soon as you sit down, you get sleepy. You get bored. Your mind isn't used to staying focused on one mental object. It's used to thinking about many, many things. So when that happens, our mind gets sleepy. Our mind gets bored. And what happens? Our mind gets obsessed by dullness and drowsiness. Like some people I know I've heard say, oh, if you can't sleep, just try meditating for a few minutes before you go to sleep. Why? Because now they use meditation as a way to fall asleep easily. So dullness and drowsiness is another factor that we have to fight against. We get sleepy. As soon as you sit down to meditate, you get tired. Your mind gets constrained. Because why? Now it's just told to focus on one thing. So that's another hindrance to our meditation. That's another hindrance to our mind. That's another hindrance to our wisdom. And you have to get rid of that with effort. And then, so that's 3. The first is sensual pleasure, ill will, and then dullness and drowsiness. And then there's restlessness and remorse. Now, restlessness and remorse works like this. You sit down to meditate, and now this whole day you've thought about work, you've thought about family, you thought about friends, you thought about problems, and all of these thoughts start flowing in. And when these thoughts start flowing in, your mind is switching from one mental object to another. It's switching from friends, it's switching to family, it's switching to problems, it's switching to work, and it's going through all of these. And then what happens is your mind says, hey, wait, we're supposed to be focusing on the meditation. What are you doing? And then you start having a remorse. You start thinking, I can't even focus on this meditation. And you get upset with yourself. You start being remorseful because your mind isn't being focused. Does that make sense? When your mind is constantly switching between different things, you aren't able to focus on your meditation. Because you aren't able to focus on your meditation, your mind starts being remorseful, saying, well, you can't even do this for a few minutes. You can't even focus. And your mind weakens. That's also a hindrance. When that kind of thought arises, you have to abandon it. You have to let it go. You have to think, no, this is a hindrance in our minds, and just remove it. It's normal for our mind to wander. After training your mind, after developing your meditation, is when it gets used to staying on one mental object. And then finally, the Supreme Buddha teaches that the last hindrance to us is doubt. Now, when we do a guided meditation, for example, when I'm saying the meditation to you, it's harder for doubt to arise. Why? Because you think, well, he's saying the meditation, the monk is saying the meditation, so I just have to think what he's saying. But when you go to practice alone, when you're sitting down and meditating, thoughts like this might arise. Am I doing this correctly? Am I sitting correctly? How am I supposed to be thinking right now? What was the starting point of this meditation? How was I supposed to continue this meditation? And all of these thoughts, all of these questions start coming to your mind. When these questions start coming to your mind, doubt arises. Thinking, am I doing this correctly? Am I doing this meditation right? Is this how it was taught? And doubt arises on what you're supposed to do. Because doubt arises, you end up abandoning the meditation. The best way to get rid of doubt is to have a good Dhamma knowledge, is to have a good understanding of how you're supposed to do the meditation, how you're supposed to be recollecting this meditation. That way your mind won't wander. Like some people come and say, oh, so when I was practicing the meditation, I saw an image of the Buddha. Or I saw I was above and I was offering a flower to the Buddha, or something like that. And we say that's just an image that you formed in your mind. It has nothing to do with the meditation. You're not supposed to be even thinking about it. You should abandon those thoughts. And then they get upset with us. So it's because they lack that Dhamma knowledge. When you practice meditation, your goal is to stay focused on that meditation object. If it's loving kindness, your goal is to stay focused on loving kindness. And similar to that is, the Supreme Buddha teaches, imagine there's a cow herder. I mean, someone who looks after cows. And what does he do? He takes one of the cows and he leads them along a field, like a crop field. There's a little muddy path in between those crops. Have you guys ever seen those? And when he's leading this cow along, the cow is looking to do what? The cow is looking to jump into the field because he wants to eat. He wants to eat all the crops. So as soon as the cow turns, what does the cow herder have to do? He has to get a stick and then hit the cow and say, no, go straight. Make sense? And then what does the cow do after a few minutes pass? The cow again, what does he do? He looks to jump into the field. And then what does the cow herder have to do again? He has to hit the cow with the stick. If he doesn't hit the cow with the stick, what happens? The cow jumps into the field and just eats as much as he wants. But after a while, after he keeps practicing, after he keeps training the cow by hitting him with the stick, eventually what happens? The cow learns not to jump into the field. Why? Because it's afraid of getting hit. In the same way, when we're practicing meditation, our mind is constantly looking to jump into one of these five. Our mind is constantly looking to switch. So what do you have to do? You have to bring your mind back to the right track. Because otherwise, what happens? We end up daydreaming. We end up lost in anger. We end up sleepy. We end up restlessness. We end up thinking about different kinds of things. We end up with doubt. So in each of those five, what do you have to do? You have to hit your mind with the mental stick. You have to bring it back to the mental object. Bring it back to the meditation. And after a time, because the cow doesn't learn after the first time it's hit, it takes time. After you practice this again and again and again, eventually your mind learns not to jump into different things. It learns to stay focused on one thing. It learns to stay on track. And then after, the meditation becomes easier. But this takes time. It won't happen overnight. You have to practice that. So for this next week, you have a week until the next session. For this next week, your entire goal, the only thing you have to do is just throughout your day, see what your mind is jumping to. See what your mind has fallen to. For example, let's say you wake up in the morning and you remember something you have to eat. Let's say, oh, I'm going to have this today. Instantly, you know, my mind has jumped to what? What did it jump to?
Sensual pleasure.
Huh?
Sensual pleasure.
Sensual pleasure. How did it jump to that?
Thinking about food.
Yes, and what does that fall under? A pleasant and appealing taste you want to experience. Then you think, okay, I'm going to eat this morning. Now, that's normal. Like, you have to think what you're going to eat because you're in the lay life. But obsessing over it, I'm going to cook it this way, I'm going to do it this way, that is falling into sensual pleasure. Your mind shouldn't be obsessed by it. Like, you have to eat, but your mind shouldn't be obsessed here. And then you think, okay, I'm going to go listen to some music. What did your mind fall into? Again, sensual pleasure. And then you remember, okay, 5 years ago, this person yelled at me, and you saw a picture of him on Facebook, let's say. Then you recollect all these feelings like, oh, this person was so mean to me. This person said this to me. This person did that to me. Now, what did your mind fall into? It fell into ill will. And then so you're going along, and your mind is jumping from work, is jumping to school, is jumping to your friends, is jumping to family problems. Your mind is now what's happening to your mind? Is becoming restless. So try seeing this for the next week. Try seeing what your mind is constantly going to. Most of the time, it'll be going to either sensual pleasure or ill will. Most of the time to sensual pleasure. That's just the nature of the mind, because it's trying to look for something that pleases it. It's trying to look for forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles that are appealing to it. It'll be constantly searching for it. So be aware of that. So for the next week, that's all you have to practice. Like, on addition to whatever you're practicing right now, on top of that, try to be aware of these 5 hindrances. And then also try, does everyone here meditate? Do you guys meditate sometime during the day? Vishaka, do you meditate every day?
Not these days.
Huh?
I haven't been able to these days. But
It's
usually,
not a good answer. Everyone else, I'm assuming you guys should have some time to devote some time to meditate. And I don't mean like you sit down for 2 hours or 3 hours. I mean, let's say for the next week, every time you wake up, you practice meditation for 1 minute. 1 minute. And then the next week, maybe 2 minutes. Just 60 seconds. Try practicing meditation. If you can't devote that kind of time, then, I mean, forget I'm going to escape from suffering. It's not going to happen. You need to devote some time. And I'm saying 1 minute. Like, if you really can't do it, if you have more time, then 5 minutes. But when you practice that meditation, try to keep your mind focused and be aware of what it is trying to fall into. Being aware that your mind is falling into sensual pleasure. So let's say you're sitting down and you're meditating now. And then the thought comes like, oh, I want to watch that show. Now a show came into your mind, or something that happened in the show came in your mind. Immediately you realize my mind has fallen into sensual pleasure. What does that fall under? That falls under wise consideration. Now you've realized your mind has gone into a defilement. You're thinking about a show. And then what do you have to do? It's not enough just to recognize it. Now you have to cut it off. So what happens? You realize, okay, my mind is in sensual pleasure. I'm thinking about a show. And then with what do you cut it off with? With wisdom. With wisdom, you cut it off. Then you abandon that sensual pleasure and you go back to your meditation object. So you can see that when you're practicing meditation, now you're developing your wisdom as well. You're developing the mind. You can practically see how that's working now. When ill will arises, you remember someone yelled at you, you realize, okay, my mind has fallen into ill will. Now that's wise consideration. But it's not enough just to realize that. What do you have to do? You have to cut it off. With that, you cut it off with wisdom. So as you practice this, for each of these hindrances, you have to realize my mind is falling into this. My mind is falling into that. Doubt usually arises when you're unfamiliar with the meditation object. For example, like to give you guys practical experience, when sometimes when monks, when they first start practicing breathing meditation, it's unclear, what am I supposed to be focusing on? What am I supposed to be looking at? What am I supposed to be thinking right now? Because you're just focusing on the breath. Then doubt arises. Am I doing this correctly? What am I supposed to be doing right now? Am I supposed to be sitting like this? Is my posture incorrect? All of these thoughts kinds of arises. So then you realize, okay, doubt has arisen. What I have to do is go and learn this meditation more. I have to go look and read the discourses again and see how I'm supposed to be doing this. And then after he's learned it, after he knows exactly how he's supposed to do it, he sits down again. And that way doubt doesn't arise. And the same for restlessness and remorse. Your mind is constantly going from one object to another, and a sadness arises. Like, oh yes, imagine today you guys practice meditation and you can do it really, really well. Your mind stays focused and only jumps once or twice. And then you practice meditation again tomorrow, and now you can't even stay focused for 5 minutes or even a minute. It keeps jumping. Then a sadness might arise. Hey, yesterday I was able to keep my mind focused for this long, but today I can't do it. That falls under remorse. You have to understand that every day is a different day. There's so many factors that go into your being able to meditate. The time you meditate at, what happened during the day before you meditated, the stress on your mind matters. All of these are different factors. What you eat matters. These are all factors that that affect your meditation. But the goal is to continually practice meditation. I'll give you an analogy. Let's say there's a store owner. There's two store owners. The first store owner, he's open today, and then tomorrow he closes. Then he's open again the next day. And for 2 days he's closed. And then he's open again just on one day. So 3 days, sometimes 3 days a week he's open. Sometimes 4 days a week he's open. Is this store going to be successful? No. What's the reason? Because he's not consistent. Now let's say someone every single day, he wakes up early in the morning and opens the store exactly at 8 a.m. and then closes the store exactly at 5 p.m. Is he going to be successful? Who says yes? Not if you think yes. Vishaka, is he going to be successful?
To a certain extent.
Huh?
Yes.
The answer is he might or might not be successful. What's the reason? Does everyone who opens a store become successful? No. Why? Because then his location matters. The number of people that visit the store matter. There's so many factors that go into a store being successful. It's the same with meditation. Just because you practice meditation every day doesn't mean every day is going to be successful. Some days you might get more customers. Some days you might get less customers. Some days might be a holiday. Some days might be different. So you have to understand there's so many factors that go into meditation that you shouldn't get upset that every day isn't successful, because that's something you can fall into. Sometimes you might achieve a concentrated mind, and then the next day, because you didn't achieve a concentrated mind, you end up becoming sad. And you just think, how do I achieve that concentration again? How do I achieve that feeling again? How do I get that again? And your mind becomes remorseful. So you have to abandon those feelings. You have to understand that one of the hindrances has arisen in my mind. I have to abandon this. And for the next week, just practice this. Even if it's 1 minute a day or 2 minutes, practice being aware of what your mind is doing during that time you meditate. Try to be aware of what is it my mind is falling into. So that's all you have to do for up till the next week. Practice that. And then for the next few weeks, for the next 3 sessions, we'll learn more about why these hindrances arise, how we can, what we can do to combat each of the hindrances, and how we can work towards getting our mind more concentrated, being more mindful throughout the day. So we practice meditation already. So all the merit we collected, we're going to end the session. All the merit we collected today, we share with all the devas. May all the devas rejoice in this merit and have the good fortune to escape from this long journey of sansara. Say sadhu. Sadhu, sadhu. We share this merit with all of these lay devotees as past relatives. May all of these lay devotees as past relatives have a good life in the next world. May they be happy and healthy. May they also have the good fortune to escape from this long journey of sansara. Say sadhu, 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 sadhu. We share this merit with our teacher, 𝗙𝗵𝗂 who taught us the Dhamma in this era. We share this merit with all the Mahamevnawa monks, all the monks training in the Buddha's dispensation. May all the monks rejoice in this merit and have the good fortune to realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautam Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We share this merit with all of the lay devotees that participated today and all of the members of their families. May all these lay devotees be happy, healthy, and well. May they have long life, and may they also have the good fortune to realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautam Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Everyone say it with me. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayang khamame bhante bhuri panya tathagata. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayang khamame dhamma sanditthika akalika. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayang khamame sangha puñakhetang anuttara. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I will chant a blessing for you all. Abhivadana silissa niccang vaddapachayino chattaro dhamma vaddanti ayuvanno sukham balang ayurarogya sampatti sagga sampatti mevacha ato nibbana sampatti minate samijjatu. May you all be happy, healthy, and well. Everyone, 𝗪𝗺 𝗪𝗏 Namo Buddhaya. If you guys have any questions, you can ask them now. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, then since no one has a question, we'll end the session here. Everyone, 𝗪𝗺 𝗪𝗏 Namo Buddhaya.